Hi everyone, welcome back to CSharpCorner live show. I'm your host Stephen Simon, and we are back once again with a very exciting episode of Ask Me Anything series. If you are joining us for the very first time, we do Ask Me Anything show every Thursday, 10 a.m. EST and 7:30 p.m. IST. And in today's episode, we have a very interesting guest coming joining us today. He's Kevin Griffin. He's an author, teacher, mentor, and a consultant focusing in software development. Uh, Surprisingly, he has been awarded with Microsoft MVP 11 times, specializing in ASP.NET and web development. And as an independent consultant, Kevin specializes in helping businesses push their technology stacks into 21st century. And you can find him speaking in different conferences now virtually and different user groups. And he would write his blogs at consultwithgriff.com. We are really honored and excited to have him today in the show. So let's welcome our guest, Kevin Griffin. Welcome, Kevin. Welcome to the live show.
Hey, Stephen, thanks for having me. And hi, everyone out there on the internet.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much for your time. I think we were just talking behind the scenes for how long we planned for this live show, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's just missed calendar opportunity and all that.
Yeah, finally, we are happy to have you. Kevin, we did have your introduction video, but still, as the format of the show says, I would request you to go ahead and give a quick introduction to the people for those who are joining us for the very first time.
Say that one more time. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry.
Live, it's awful.
I'll tell you, I've been mute many times, as even you said, right? So it's okay. So I just said, if you would like to go ahead and give a quick introduction about who you are, what you do, and from where you're joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin. I am an independent consultant. Been doing that for about 10 years now. And my focus has primarily been in ASP.NET Core development, deploying solutions in Microsoft Azure. And I just love teaching people stuff. I run a .NET user group here in the Virginia area called the HamptonRoads.net. We've been doing that for almost 11 years now. And I just enjoy teaching everything I know. And that's how, if I ever can give someone one piece of advice, just teach everything you know, and good things will happen to you. But I'm excited to be with you all here today. And yeah, hopefully I can drop some knowledge.
Yeah, pretty well said that you always love to share what you have learned, right? So I think that is what we're going to do today. And this is all community all about. And having said that, you're a person who has been awarded 11 times Microsoft MVP. That's a lot. Let me ask you, Kevin, how was it? It was about getting that award for the very first time, and how have you been consistent for almost 11 years? Because it's a community service, right?
Yeah.
You don't get paid for it. You have a 9-to-5 job. You have to work for the clients. But how have you been so consistent from past 11 years?
It's so much of the MVP award, and I tell this to up and coming MVPs, that you don't do what you're doing for the sake of the MVP. The MVP is kind of the icing on the cake, to turn a phrase. But if you enjoy speaking at community events, so like the great things that CSharpCorner does, there's events all around the globe that you could speak at on topics that you're passionate about. When you talk about the things that you have passion in, people will respond to that. Answer their questions, engage with people. That's the easiest thing you can do, is just respond to someone when they have a question or have a conversation. Doing these things add up. And that's something I think the MVP program recognizes us for, because we're out there and we're teaching and we're promoting products, but we're teaching the stuff that we're passionate about. And that's being an MVP. And the number one thing I get so much from people about the MVP program. Oh, you must be an expert. No, I am barely good enough to do my job.
Don't tell us that,
But
right?
it, but don't look at an MVP as a source of expertise. Look at it MVP as a source of, well, I think I know. Let me double check, and let's talk about this. That's an MVP in my book.
That's great, well. So you don't have to be very experienced. I mean, as you said, you have been doing consultancy from last maybe like 10 years,
Yeah.
and you're an MVP like for 11 times. So there was a time when you really started, right? So MVP is someone who could reach out and say, hey, I'm facing problem with some of my solutions. Maybe you can go ahead and help me with that, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, MVP is someone who would just take some time from his day-to-day job, would try to help you out, and just for the cause of community. And very well said that the forums, right? The lovely, like you put some questions that the tons of people around the globe would just go and on, would like to just go and help you out, right? So
Yeah.
that's a pretty good point you covered. I think we have people joining. Hi, Narayan. Hi, Abhishek, and a couple of questions were coming. So, Kevin, hello everyone. So, as you know, the title of the live show says, we're gonna talk about background services with Azure Logic apps and functions. Like that's a very big title. So, would you like to give a brief about what the viewers who are watching us today, what they're going to learn, and what they should be actually expecting through this next
Sure.
maybe like 25 minutes?
So one of the things I have learned over my experience as a software developer is that code I don't have to write is code that's probably going to work. And I've really grasped onto these concepts of low no code solutions
Yeah.
where I can connect to services, I can make applications do things, but I don't have to write code. And Azure Logic Apps really scratch that itch. And what I hope to teach people today is how do you build a very simple Azure Logic app? Was it kind of get the idea of what it's doing? And then this will start your brain thinking about solutions that you can apply to Logic apps and Azure functions that will make your lives easier, but they will do things that will make you look really smart, but you don't have to be really smart to do them.
Definitely interesting tagline, sir. You look smart, but you're not actually smart. All right, so Kevin, I think I'll pull up your presentations on the
Okay.
screen, right? And let me bring it. All right, all
Yeah.
details for this talk, I can see it. And I think Kevin and Michael has been investing a lot into this low code, no code, right? We're going to talk about your presentation, the different services that Microsoft provide. For now, guys can see your presentation and you can go ahead and get started.
Alrighty. So the number one question people always have after any session is, hey, where can I get the slides? Where can I get this content? I missed something. Obviously, you can watch this replay, but this is the condensed version of the talk that I'm going to do. If you want to see the full talk and a whole bunch of examples, go to this website, consultwithgriff.com/21st century.
Kevin, if it's possible, can you put that link into the private section so that I can put it in the comments?
Yeah. Hold on.
All right, maybe I'll put your entire website in the comments, right?
All right, you know what, that works. You can, well, hold
Yeah.
on. I got it. I already have it up, so we'll put it in the private chat.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay,
Okay.
got it. Thank you.
So I'm going to kind of gloss over this idea of background services because I don't think it plays into the rest of the narrative. But when you build applications, there are certain things that need to happen in the background that you don't want your main web app or client-facing app to do. For example, like sending emails, processing payments, cleaning up after itself. These are background tasks that do not and should not happen within say an ASP.NET Core application that's processing. Email is a perfect example. If I click a button on a website and it triggers a call back to my server, the server should not immediately send the email. What it should do is it should make a note to send that email later. And later might be half a millisecond, or it might be 5 minutes from now. It could be an hour from now. Eventually, it will send the email. But the key is you don't want your web server to have that burden of making sure it's sending email. What if the email server is down? What if our payment processor is down? You also want to build in some sort of redundancy, making sure that these things actually happen. And your user doesn't care. They just like, oh, press the button. I want something to happen. So there's a lot of ways to do background services in the Microsoft ecosystem. I use one a lot called Hangfire, and I love Hangfire. I'm never going to say anything bad about it, but it's one of those things where you have to set up a little bit of infrastructure to do processing in the background, and it's not the sort of thing I want for every application. There's also new hosted background tasks or hosted services in ASP.NET Core. Love these, but you still have to build a little bit of infrastructure around it if you want them to work reliably all the time. You can't just start using them. You have to actually build some of the facade for interfacing. One of the problems I've had with running background, let's say a Hangfire service or my own workers, is that the more processes that occur, they can get resource heavy. So I might have a very simple Azure app service that is just running background tasks. And depending on how much is going on, I'm pegging it. And I'm not trying to give it more resources than it needs, but sometimes I just will peg up to 100% because it's doing a lot of work. And a lot of that might just because I'm an awful developer. I don't know. But what if there was a better way? A good friend of mine introduced me to Azure Logic Apps about a year and a half ago. And he said, let me show you this and see if I blow your mind. The easiest way I can explain Azure Logic Apps is that it's like services similar to Zapier or If This Then That. Most people have used or heard of either of those services. They are task oriented. There's no or low code necessary in order to use them. And they work kind of like this. There's some sort of trigger. So a trigger might be just a timer that a recurrence every Monday at 9:00 a.m. I want something to happen. You might have a webhook. So another service calls and it says, up, an event's occurred. That might trigger your Logic app. But triggers could, and we'll show you a couple triggers, will blow your mind. What if I get an email to my Office 365 account? That could be a trigger. What if someone inserts a new row into a Google spreadsheet? That could be a trigger. There's really thousands of triggers possible within Logic apps. And we're going to do a real example here in a moment and show you what we do. But when a trigger occurs, that leads on to a series of actions. And these actions can be something as simple as calling an Azure function where you do write some code. It might be adding or getting rows from a database, SQL Server. You might pull a file out of Azure Blob Storage. You might send an email to a Gmail account. For having 1,000 some triggers, there's tens of thousands of actions that can be performed. And it's really up to you and what your mind can come up with. The nice thing about Logic apps, and this goes back to my resource analogy a second ago, is that Logic apps are consumption based. So you only pay for what the Logic app uses at the time the Logic app runs. I have a Logic app that runs once a day in the morning and runs for about 5 seconds. That Logic app costs 15 cents, US dollars. 15 cents a month to execute. Whereas being a part of the app plan that I originally had, that and some other tasks running, was costing 90 some dollars a month because we just paid for the basic service, and that was just the cost associated with it. So it was really nice to go back to clients and say, all right, I've knocked $100 off your bill, and they're like, what? How'd you do that? I just changed my mindset from having to write a bunch of code and maintain code to just designing a couple Logic apps. So let's jump into a demo, and there's going to be some audience participation here. I have already set up a resource group in Azure. If you've never used Microsoft Azure before, just kind of try to keep along. I'm going to add a new resource. So we're going to add a Logic app. And we'll say create. And we have to give our Logic app a name. So we'll call this just a CSharpCorner Logic app. I'm going to put mine into the East US data center and hit create. This part only takes a moment, knock on wood. There we go. Go to resource. When you create a Logic app for the first time, you're brought into the Logic App Designer. And I want to spend just a moment here because this is really cool. They want to help guide you through the process of building your first Logic app. And everything in a Logic app starts with a trigger. What is going to trigger this Logic app to run? And they give you a couple of the common ones, and then there are a couple recipes down the way. So let's look at common triggers. When a message is received in a service bus queue, so if you're using Azure storage and using Azure service bus, well, that's a common trigger. If something's dropped into a queue, let's pick it up and let's do something with it. When a new file is created on OneDrive, all right, you might have a background task that needs to run whenever files are added to a particular folder in OneDrive. I've seen that a lot over the past 15 years, where someone just sets up a folder and something's dropped into it, you pick it up and you process it. When new email is received in Outlook.com, okay? I don't use Outlook.com, but if one of my clients did, I have a trigger here. But we can scroll down and see what type of recipes people have built on top of a lot of these connectors. Here's a common one I actually use on If This Then That, and I should probably convert it to Logic Apps. Share my new Instagram photos to Twitter. So I'm connecting to Instagram. I'm connecting to Twitter. When a new post on Instagram shows up, that's the trigger. It will then pull those photos off and drop them on the Twitter. So pretty cool. All right, let's walk through an example. I'm going to go back up to common triggers, and I'm going to choose the one here that says when a new tweet is posted, because we're going to play a little game. Don't tweet anything yet. I'll tell you when. The first thing Logic Apps needs to do in order to connect to Twitter is it needs some Twitter credentials. It uses the Twitter API underneath the scenes. So it's going to ask me to connect to Twitter. I'll see plus. It's going to come up and ask me for my Twitter credentials. Thank you, LastPass. And this just created underneath the scenes what we call a connector or API connection. It is a resource where the credentials are stored. You can't access them after the fact. You can't reset them. They are stored and just sitting there. But this Twitter resource is now reusable across any of my Logic apps. So this is really nice. I could create this connection and then have other developers come in, use the Twitter connection, but they don't need to know our credentials. They can just start using the Twitter stuff. So I'll say, okay, I have Twitter. Let's connect. We're actually in our trigger now. So the trigger is when a new tweet is posted. And we're going to ask the Twitter search API to search for some text. We're going to use my Twitter ID, which is right below my name. And we're going to check the search every... I'm going to do this in seconds. All right. Last time when I did 1 second, we had some issues. So we're going to say every 10 seconds. That seems like a more round number. There's some other parameters we can choose. So maybe if I want to check every 10 seconds, but I don't want this to start until tomorrow, I could set a start time for some time in the future and also base that off a particular time zone. So if I need 9 o'clock a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, I could set those parameters, but not necessary for us. Now let's assume that the workflow is running. A tweet comes in, and it's just going to be one tweet. What happens next? So we have to go to the next step, which is choose an action. Well, I want to do something fun here. I want to do some sentiment analysis on whatever the tweet is. And we can do that with a action called, or a connector called Text Analytics. And there's an action in here called Detect Sentiment, or Detect Sentiment V2. Not quite sure what the difference between them are. But I can say Detect Sentiment, and it needs to connect to a cognitive services account, which I happen to have. So I'll just call this connection cog. I need to give it an account key, which I have copied right there. And you also have to give it a URL. Now, if you create a cognitive services account in Azure, you can get all this information. So we'll hit create. Now this creates a new connector, no LastPass. Creates a new connector in your Azure resource group. So you can reuse this as many times as you need to. You never have to type in credentials again. Now I have to tell sentiment analysis what it is I want to run sentiment on. And you have to provide really two pieces of information. You have to give the document that you're processing a unique ID, and then you have to tell the text to analyze. So for ID, I have to give it a unique, non-empty document identifier. It could be numbers, letters, it doesn't matter. Well, let's click on that box, and let's scroll over here to the right. This is called the expression editor, and it's in Logic Apps. Now, there is a whole programming language built into Logic Apps, which is awesome. I'm not going to be able to show you any of that stuff, but it's a smart expression editor. It's looking at everything that's happened before this action, triggers, actions, and alike. And Logic Apps is telling me, here are items of metadata that I think you could use in this box. So tweet text, tweeted by, name, location, and there's descriptions for all this stuff, which is amazing. Tweet ID. All right, let's just use the tweet ID as the document ID. There's no reason not to. So we'll click that. It adds the placeholder in the text box. So we can identify this later if we needed to. For document text, we might as well use the tweet text. That's what we want to detect. And I'll close that. Now, this can be a list of documents. So we're sending a one element array to sentiment analysis, and it's going to send us a one element array back. Oh, well. Let's go to the next step. Cognitive Services does its sentiment analysis. It's sending us back a score. What do we do with that score? I want to drop that score into a Google spreadsheet. Why? I don't know. That's just what I want to do. So let's choose an action. There, you see, it's smart. It knows I'm going to ask for Google Sheets, but I could go into the search box and I could search through all these different connectors. Let's take a moment to appreciate the number of services in this box. GitHub, Gmail, if you use Infusionsoft for sales marketing, if you use MailChimp for email, MSD and weather. I'm going to go back and take a look at that one. That one's going to be interesting. Outlook.com. The list goes on. And for any of these, so let's go down to Google Sheets, which I had earlier. Google Sheets. There's a list of actions that are with that. So we'll insert a row into a Google Sheet. It's going to ask me to create another API connection because I'm not connected to my Google account. So I'm going to do that off screen. Hold on. And this part always takes a moment or two. So we're going to let it process. So while that processes, I've used this with probably a couple dozen different services. I have workflows, and this is what you'll see on my website. Workflows for cleaning up Azure Blob Storage because I accidentally put like a couple hundred gigabytes of data into Blob Storage that I completely forgot about. And I had to clean it up. So I wrote a Logic app that did that work for me. All right. We're here. So now we have to pick a file in Google Drive. And that's going to be easy enough. So down here, tweets about me. It's going to read that Google Sheet. It's going to ask me which worksheet I want out of that Google Sheet. I just have one. It's going to read that worksheet. And then it's going to ask me which of the fields do you want to fill in? Tweeted by, tweeted text, tweeted score. Now, it doesn't know how to do encoding, so you have the encoding in there. But if we go back, we can see tweeted by, tweeted text, tweeted score. It's also added its own ID because it's going to track the rows that it's adding. So tweeted by, we need to fill in these blanks. Tweeted by, we can get that from the Twitter trigger. The tweeted text, we can also get from the trigger. The score, we can get from Cognitive Services. So you can see I have another item here, detect sentiment. And there's no score. It's just ID. Well, that's because the expression editor is trying to determine what would fit best in the box that you're currently looking at. And score comes back as a number, not as a text field. So it's not showing up in the list. I mean, just a type difference. Let's say see more, and we can see there's score, which is a number. It's a decimal. And we can select that in its place. So, Logic Apps just did something interesting here. It still placed my score. It gives you all kinds of pop-ups that tell you what it did. So it placed my score, but Logic Apps realized that the document coming back, it was actually an array of documents. And I wasn't telling it which item in the array that I wanted to use. So it stuck that entire action inside of a for each loop. So it's going to iterate through that list of documents it gets back from sentiment analysis. And it will insert one row for every document. Now, it's only ever going to get back one document. And I could rewrite that score expression to only ever pull the one document from the array and just not deal with this for each. I'm going to leave it in here because it's interesting. But I think we're done. I'm going to hit save. And I'm going to hit run. What I need you to do, anyone out there, send a nice tweet about me to my name below, at 1KevGriff, or just 1KevGriff. And we're going to let this run for a moment. So it's checking every 5 seconds. And don't make me go tweet about myself. That's vain. I had to do that a couple nights ago.
I got your back, Kevin.
All right.
Here.
Thanks, Steven.
Did you get any tweet?
I just saw your tweet came in. Cool. All right. So it processed. Now let's walk through this real fast. So this is showing you a run history. A run of this Logic app has executed. And we can go through each step of the way and see, okay, the search text was 1KevGriff. A tweet came in from Steven. Loving Azure Logic apps with 1KevGriff. Awesome. That tweet went through sentiment analysis. So we can see this is what sentiment analysis got. This is what sent back. 0.96%. That's 96% positive. Thank you. That's awesome. So we took.
You couldn't have asked anything more.
It's hard to get 100%. Like even the most loving message will still be 97%. So you take that score and we iterate through the list of documents. And again, it's just one. We take all the information, pass it into Google Drive, and then Google Drive adds it to our spreadsheet. And it all happens automatically. So anyone else, well, I'll just leave this up. Anyone else out there watching, you could just tweet at me and it will show up in the spreadsheet eventually, which is really cool. So, and then like for the for each, you can iterate through every item in that list and you can see what each individual input did. So I love this designer. I love this connector. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up here because I would love to answer your questions. But a couple little details. There's also a full code view. So this entire layout is a JSON schema. So you could copy this. You can edit this directly. There is now support in VS Code for building Logic apps. It's still a fairly new feature. I've used it once and ran into a couple small issues, but those were more me. But the editor is great. If you need, say maybe you write an action, you want to copy and paste it somewhere. You can just come through and copy and paste the actions you need, paste them somewhere else, make a couple small changes. It's like you're doing real development. Like you go to Stack Overflow, you go to CSharpCorner, you find a snippet of code that works really well for you, copy, paste it, and cool, you're a developer. I mean, you do the same thing here. You just copy and paste your code. So I love this designer. For any action that runs, you can look at all your previous runs. So down here at the bottom, you see I've only had one successful run. Now, it's checking every 5 seconds for new tweets. But if no new tweets are there, it's not going to run the action. I'm not going to get charged for that, just checking. So this is the only thing I will ever be charged for. This is a fraction of a penny at the end of the month for this one run, which is why I'm fine just leaving it up for a couple days because it's not going to cost me anything. So I love Logic Apps a ton. So with that, if you go to the website, I kind of go deep into the expression editor, and I also have a bunch of scenarios in here. So if you want to see a scenario for how we process incoming Gmail to extract an Excel spreadsheet, parse the Excel spreadsheet, and then write to a SQL Server database the content of that spreadsheet, we built workflows for that. So there's a lot of examples in here. And I would say the last thing is I talk about Azure Functions, but we couldn't go deep into that, is that there are scenarios with Logic Apps where you will hit a wall and go, if I could only write a little bit of code, this would solve my problem. Well, that's Azure Functions. You write an Azure function when you need to write that little bit of code. It's your fallback. And you can call your Azure Functions directly from Logic Apps, and they just marry up very well. So I have an example of a Logic app I used to convert Excel date time values, which are they're, I don't remember what the official term for them is, but they're based off the number of days since January 1st, 1900, which doesn't make sense in any other daytime cases. So it was something I couldn't do in Logic Apps, but I built an Azure function to do it for me. And it's been running great for months and months and months, and only cost a couple pennies. So with that, I'll put up my slide again. Thank you all so much for just listening to me banter. I would love to answer your question.
Yeah, that was fantastic session, Kevin. Let me. All right, so let me put up the okay, perfect. So that was fantastic session, Kevin. I love that you did all that just through drag and drop. I mean,
Yeah.
just through some clicks, right? No code involves, right? And you just created an entire Logic app within maybe 10 minutes or what?
Yeah.
Right? Imagine if I had to write an entire application for it and to host it. It would have taken me I have to sketch it out, then I have to talk to my senior manager. Hey, is it good or not? This is a long process that goes by. But you did all that into the cloud inside a browser, no code, right? So here's my very first question, Kevin. Then I'll
Okay.
ask you, right? Here's my very first question. As we are moving more towards low code, no code, right? What is the qualification if someone says you says I am the one who works on these technologies like low code, no code, and if someone wants to get into an interview, right? He's into an interview. So what would be my skills that will be judged? Because at the end of the day, I'm just using the technology, right? I
Yeah.
don't know how to code. So is it really that you shouldn't know how to code, or it just like it's a low code that talks here?
It's not necessarily that you don't want to go in and say I don't code. What you do
Yeah.
is you go in and have the conversation of, do I need to code? And
Mm-hmm.
I feel that you take a lot of junior level developers. I remember being that person saying, I just want to write code. I want to write code. I want to write code. As you mature and get a little bit more senior level, you start to realize that code I don't have to write is code that's probably going to work. And you start developing more of a systems mindset. And so a code approach is I need to solve a problem. So I'm going to write code to solve the problem. A more systems oriented approach will go, well, I need this system to talk to that system to talk to that system. And how do I lay these out? I think a junior level developer going into an interview explaining how systems work would instantly put him or her above anyone who goes, I just learned C# and I can write basic ASP.NET Core applications. I think that's the next. That's what qualifies a senior level or architect level developer, is that he or she has an understanding of systems. How do systems work? Because you just don't work in your own little silo system anymore. Your system is talking to Stripe for email process or for credit card processing. You're talking to some sort of email system for sending email. You have to link all these systems together, and having that understanding And Logic Apps just kind of shows you that graphically to you build that understanding. Um, and going back to your original point, if I had to write this code, I now need to understand how the Twitter API works, which is not it's easier, but I have to build a connector to the Twitter API or use an off-the-shelf Twitter library, which I would have to learn. I would
Yeah.
have to create a developer account, do all that good stuff. Then I would have to learn the Cognitive Services API, which is a Microsoft API, so it's probably not difficult. Just pull in a couple dependencies. Then I have to learn the Google API for talking to Sheets, and that is a lesson in pain. Like if you've never used a Google API, they're just awful. They are horribly like Google is not known for developer friendliness. It's good for other things. It's not good for developer friendliness. You would spend a week just learning how to add one row to a spreadsheet. So put all that together, I have now condensed a week's worth of developer time into 10 minutes. And
Yeah.
that is just a win for everyone. If you're a junior level developer coming in and saying, look, I can basically condense a week's worth of time into 10 minutes. The people on the other side of the
You're
table
hired.
go,
You're just hired.
oh, all right, sold. We'll do that.
That's very well answered. I mean, one has to be smart these days, right? You don't have to spend time just on building what can be done with just low code, no code approach.
Mhm.
A bunch of people is appreciating your concepts and the way you've explained it, right? So thank you, Govardhan. Thank you. Avinash has a question that is a good one about security issues. Avinash says, is the authentication details integrated safe? Where does it store the credentials? If you could just help us with that.
Yeah, they're safe. So first, you're in the magical bubble of Azure, and second, I can show you where they actually store it. So if you want to show my screen share again, um, we'll go into my resource group, and you can see here my 3 API connections: one for Cognitive Services, one for Google Sheets, one for Twitter. If I go into any of these, this is just it's just a connection level wrapper. So the actual credentials, there's no way to access them there. They're if you can't find them, you can't access them. I can go in I can reauthorize under a different account. So I was at one Kev Griff. I could go authorize it with a different Twitter account later. But other than that, there's no way to access this API connection after it's been created. I either have to go create another one, or some of these connectors give you the opportunity to change it. But that's pretty darn secure in my book. If you can't possibly get to the credentials, there is no possibility of them getting leaked.
And I think Kevin, this is something. I think this is this authentication that you gave it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yep.
Yeah, and this is something we do it like very often. Every platform that you go, right? It may be a startup's website or maybe a very fancy Amazon or something. But you will find these login credentials available over there. So you just click in and you just log in. They would
Yep.
just ask me your basic details. That is same with this Logic app. I would quickly like to know, Kevin, as you did mention that one would have to create a Twitter developers account where then you have to have some external libraries. If one is working with Python, it may be Tweepy, and then you have to just write an entire Python code, make sure it runs after after like 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds. When we talk about this, what are the permission that we have given? Is it like we have given read, write, and all that, or just we have given a read permission? And one more question would be that can I get details only for Kevin account, or I can do it for any particular string also?
Yeah. So to answer your first question, the permissions to the different connectors will really depend on the connector. Most likely, like the Twitter connector, I wish I had paid more attention because it told me exactly what permissions it was giving.
Okay.
But if you go and look at the things you can do with the API, so let me see. Let me go into my Logic app real fast and go into edit. Let's just pick.
Mhm.
So if I did Google Sheets again, so
Kevin, I think you've already connected it, right? I think you've already connected it to your Google.
I've already connected it, but this is
Yeah.
so this can answer your second question as well. I can set up multiple connectors for different people, different service for different services. So if I have my personal Gmail account or Google account, but if we had a corporate Google account as well, we could come in and set up another set of credentials. So this might not be the best one.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yep, verify it's me. It should come up. And all right, so here we go. So it's giving me a list of what I want to do. I want to see, edit, create all your Google Drive files. It needs that so it can give me a listing. And then it wants to be able to see, edit, create, and delete spreadsheets in Google Drive. That's all, because it's only focusing on Google Sheets at the moment. If I was doing something with other Google services, it might have to ask for more permission. So it is trying to only ask for the permissions you need at the time. And yeah, you can create as many connections as you want to. I've never seen that before. So what I do, so one of the scenarios I walk through in my slide deck is connecting to an email service. And when we send email, I never test directly with a real email service. We use a service called Mailtrap just to test outgoing email without the fear of accidentally emailing someone, which you don't want to do. So we have multiple connections, one to our real email and one to our fake email. And so when we're in development mode, we'll use all the development services, and then we'll go back and we'll switch them all to the production versions. There's no real good debugging story in Logic Apps other than just running the triggers. So don't send things to real services unless you're ready to send things to real services. The key for me are keeping Logic Apps small. So trigger, action, action, action. I have a couple Logic Apps that are pretty involved, and they just think of a complicated application. The more function calls you make, the longer your functions are, the more complicated the code is. Logic Apps don't escape that. If you have 50 actions in a Logic App, it's a lot to get through, to the point where you have to zoom out and then scroll around so you can see everything that's happening. The nice part here is it's a map. You can follow it from top to bottom, and there's also branches, and you can do a lot of complex stuff with the Logic App. But
that's great. I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, you just clarified that depending upon the connectors, it would take your permissions only that is needed, right? If you're connecting it maybe to a voice assistant, it may ask you for your microphone or maybe something like that. Whereas if you're just doing a Google Sheet, it may ask you to read and write your Excel file. I think depending upon the connectors and your use cases. That's perfectly answers. Govardhan again goes and says the next generation of codeless computing has started, and Azure is the first in the pipeline. I'm not sure if it is first in the pipeline, but definitely it has democratized where you can do all this into the cloud service. And you did mention the very beginning of your session that we already had this type of services. IFTT, if this then that, I mean, that is something we all used, right? But now since it is the cloud, I think even the enterprise, and I think this will be very helpful for people in the enterprise where they can, really automate their repetitive tasks, right? They don't have to download the file, put it on the OneDrive. I mean, that is kind of automated, but lot many things that you gave in the example that can be done. Quickly, we'll take one more question from Suresh. If you can just relate it, I'm not sure if it is related. It says, difference between region and integration service environment on Logic Apps. Ooh.
That's a great question. I don't have a competent answer to that question. So I believe what he is referring to is when you create a Logic app, where I hate the marketplace search sometimes.
While you do that, Kevin, I just went on to find out that you talked about you could also do it in Visual Studio Code, and there is a Visual Studio Code extension available if you just go to the marketplace and search for Azure Logic Apps. You can get it. Of course, it is not very mature. There are a lot many services to add, but you can definitely do it. And also with the Azure CLI.
So what I believe the question was referring to is this selector right here. So you select a region, so the data center you want to host your Logic app inside of. And then you have the other item for integration service environments. Integration service environments are like dedicated app services that, and I don't use them because they're really expensive. So that's the reason I don't have that much experience with them. But integration service environment is like your own dedicated pool. So let's just say you're basically renting an entire server in a particular data center. That's all you. It's dedicated resource. You can put your logic apps in there. Um, and you can see I don't have any, and I probably wouldn't. I think I set one up once. It takes a
Mhm.
while to set up, and once you have it, it's actually kind of costly. So
Yeah.
that's the reason I don't have any. But if you know you have an integration service environments and you can host your logic apps there because it's just compute. Because you can do the same thing with app services, web apps, background workers. You can also do the same thing with serverless. So if you want to keep all that in the one house, that's what you use integration service environment for. So
Oh,
good question.
cool. Yeah, I think people are really appreciating this. Yes, it was very quick and smart demo, Kevin.
Awesome. I'm glad you all enjoyed it.
Yeah, and before we go on, Kevin, we'll ask a couple of more questions quickly,
Yeah.
right? So
Bring it on.
I think we are almost time. We have around 5 or 10 minutes more to go. As Kevin, you did mention about the debugging part, right? There's not much into debugging when it comes to Logic App, but the demos that he showed today, it was using the Twitter APIs,
Yeah.
and one never went to Twitter developers at twitter.com. You didn't sign it up for the Twitter API. It was all happened through OAuth authentication, right? So my quick question, Kevin, would be is like there are some limitations, as you said, you're running it every 5 seconds, right? So there are some limitations to how many requests you can make within a certain given of time period. So how does one handle with that when there's some exceptions, right? So is there any way one can handle a try and catch inside Logic apps?
Yep. Yes. Actually, I have slides for that. So there is a robust. Let me find the slide.
You had to cut a
Yeah,
lot for
it's
discussion,
here. Here
looks
we go.
like.
So there's a full retry mechanism built into Logic Apps. Underneath the scenes, everything you're doing is making web requests, and Logic Apps is monitoring for how those services respond. Here's an example of an Azure function I called where I sent wrong data to the Azure function. So the Azure function did exactly what it's supposed to do. It sent back a 400 bad request. The Azure Logic Apps picked that up and went, okay, let's try again. Because sometimes the problem isn't you. Sometimes the problem is just it was the wrong time of day when you made the request. Computers are weird. So you make the request again. And it's just a simple retry model. What Logic Apps does is it will retry up to 4 times. And if it fails the fourth time, it'll just fail the entire Logic app. You could also go into Logic Apps and tell actions, it's okay for this action to fail. If it fails, go do something else. You can have branching logic based off of success or failures. If I have actually have an example of this, we talked to a discourse form system, which
Okay.
is amazing. But when I'm too chatty with it, it will return a 429 too many requests.
Yeah.
So it rate limits me. Well, when that happens, all you really have to do is just try again a couple seconds later. Logic Apps does that for me automatically. So, whereas if I were writing code, I would call that service, get back to 429, and I would probably just throw an exception or just cancel what I was doing. You could build your own retry logic, and there are great libraries out there for doing that. So, but you have to do the hard work. Here, it's just being given to you. And if 4 times isn't enough, you could tell it, well, try 10 times once every minute. And it will keep trying until it gets a success. When it succeeds, it moves on to the next thing. So that's how we handle try catch exceptions in Logic Apps. And it works really well for most of our cases.
Great, looks fun, and I think Logic Apps has everything that you could have coded right. They have every chunks that you can just go ahead and do it. And I love the part that you said that you can do those conditions, right? If it is true, if it is false,
Yep.
right? You can make your Logic Apps depending upon that. And adding to it, maybe if it's like your response is 4 to 9, you can send a notification or an email through Logic Apps, hey, that your application is stopped, right? Too many requests you're making, so
Yep.
maybe you can add more to it. Talking about Kevin, as you said that there are many connectors available, right? Is it just the way we have other platforms like IFTT? I, as an individual, can I go ahead and create a public connector so that people can use it? Is it possible?
Absolutely. So there's information on the link I gave earlier to building custom connectors. So if you have an API you want to use inside of Logic Apps, you can build a connector around that. And I've never done that. It's been on my list of things to do to try, but that's something that they have full support for. And not only that, Logic Apps. So there's Logic Apps, and then there's another business system called Power Apps,
Yep.
Power Apps or Flow. And I don't have any experience with that, but the connectors are actually the same between the two. So if you have experience with Power
Okay.
Apps and Flow, you already understand what's going on here. They're the exact same system.
Mhm. Looks like Microsoft has built in an entire ecosystem. Like we have flows that talks about the RPA, then we have Power Apps that you can go ahead and build low code, no code applications, right? And then we have this Logic Apps which has been there for a while, right? And just but before we wrap, Kevin, one thing as you just mentioned about the REST APIs, right? So is it possible that if I have a Logic app, I can go ahead and create an API and I just maybe get things dirty and use it in an application? Is that possible? Does that provide to create me a custom API?
So you don't get an API per se, but what you could
Okay.
do, and this is what I've done several times, is you can set up a trigger that's a webhook. So Logic Apps will create a URL endpoint for you with a token that so it's totally protected. And if you call that, it kicks off a Logic app. We do that in some of our projects where we we need to kick off a background service. So we just set up a webhook Logic app, and our application makes that webhook, and we just trust everything's going to happen afterwards. That's worked extremely well, but you don't necessarily have a API for calling Logic apps.
But I think that does serve the purpose, right? You have a webhook, you have a token, almost like it does the servers. And as is mentioned, it has a JSON response. It does give you a JSON response where you can eventually go ahead and maybe integrate in whichever way you want to do it. Great session, Kevin. A lot to be learned in just like a 40, 45 minutes that you gave. Very interactive, and I think people out there really love your interactive session. I believe a bunch of resources that you share and a demo that I really loved it. Totally low code, no code approach, how you can save your time, how enterprise can use it. You compared it with some other services, how you can handle like a exception, try and catch. It's a lot to be learned, Kevin. Worthwhile waiting for you for this so long time to have you on the show. That's great that we finally had it. Thank you once again, Kevin. So before I just let you go, is there anything that you feel or that the Logic app should improve, or maybe you want people to watching on how they should even maybe let's say go and get started with Logic apps? How one should after the session?
The Google, or I'm sorry, not Google. The Microsoft Docs are amazing. I love that
Okay.
so much. So I have a link on my website to the official documentation for Logic apps. They have a couple small projects just to walk you through a Logic app. But the best piece of advice I have, because it doesn't really cost you anything, you just go in and build something. Look through the list of connectors and go, oh, I could connect GitHub to Google Sheets. I don't know why you would, but play with these workflows and get some experience with the expression editor and connecting things up. There is a learning curve there. I made it look really simple, but once you get into more complex um, bindings in the expression editor, it takes a little bit of practice, and I don't feel like Stack Overflow hasn't caught up with the questions being asked in Logic apps yet. So you'll hit a
Okay.
couple walls, and it's just a matter of figuring out. All right, I need to combine all these things together to get this one thing done. It's possible, It's just how quickly can you come to those conclusions. But the Microsoft Docs are the best place to start. I love the docs.
Yeah, as you said, I've shared the Microsoft Docs links in the comments. Everyone who's watching, they can just go to that link and maybe have a look at it. And as you said, why would anyone I like to connect GitHub with your Google Sheet? Maybe what I would do is, Kevin, is connect the GitHub to my email account, and when anyone forks it, right, I would just send him an email. Thank you for all that. But that's
Exactly.
pretty cool, right? Wow, I mean, I love this tool. I'm gonna do it right away. All right, Kevin. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate. Thank you so much for all that you have done for the community. I, Stephen Simon, on behalf of entire C Sharp Corner and its millions of users, would like to thank for your valuable time and the contribution you have made to the community. We would really love to have you back once again. This time
Yeah.
a little soon, right? Not long follow up. Right, I think emails works fine, right? Emails works a little good. All right, Kevin, thank you so much for your time, and have a good day ahead.
All right. Thank you, everyone.